Happy Monday, everybody. Hope you're all doing well as we come here to the third week of Lorwyn Eclipsed. One of the downsides with the early month data is that there's a little bit of a small sample size issue. So if you look over in the top right, you'll see 49,000 matches. If you compare this to last week for Diamond and above, it was closer to 140,000. So we almost have a third less amount of data, or I should say it's only a third of what there was last week. But there's still some interesting insights, some fun decks to talk about, some interesting lists. So let's get started. So number one, we've got mono white aggro. You'll notice the win rate is at 56.5, which is lower than Dimir Excruciator at 57, but the sample size, right? So part of this is that the Dimir Excruciator's win rate will drop as there's more matches played. And we know mono white aggro is a good deck. It has been around for a while. So switch things over here. And so mono white aggro, this is kind of the meta defining deck. It's the most popular deck, bronze to mythic. And it's kind of the deck to beat, if you will. And there's lots of people in the early part of February who, while everybody else was exploring Lorwyn Eclipsed cards, just kind of kept to what they knew worked. And so you got just maximizing enchantment synergies around the Optimistic Scavenger, Ethereal Armor, Sheltered by Ghosts. I don't want to spend too much time on this because we've already talked about this deck a lot. And then number two was Dimir Excruciator. And Dimir Excruciator we talked about last week during the Pro Tour. So this is the new deck that everyone's checking out because it won first place last week in the Lorwyn Eclipsed Pro Tour. And I don't think it's going to be the best of one deck. It definitely has a lot of creature hate. So the more that you're coming up against creature-based decks and not coming up against 4-color Reanimator or Jeskai Control or Azorius Control or Temur Omniscience, that sort of thing, then this is going to do well. Right, so if you're coming up against a lot of mono white aggro, then Dimir Excruciator is going to find its place in the meta. And so you got just re-wrathing the board, controlling the board, single point interaction to boot, a little bit of hand hate, and then you've got the Doomsday Excruciator, which you can mill and then get out on turn 4 with Caviero, and then you have to win by milling them with the Restless Reef or the Insatiable Avarice. So it's not going to be like a bad best of one deck, but you know it definitely has a different spot in the meta in best of 3. Number 3 is Simic Ouroboroid, and we talked about this one last week, and you can see that there's no changes to the list that we talked about last week. So this is, you know, trying to ramp as quickly as you possibly can into a Crater Hoof Behemoth. You have Dig with Quantum Riddler, Meringue River Regent, a little bit of Graveyard Hate with the Keen-Eyed Curator and the Sentinel of Lost Lore. Nature's Rhythm allows you to tutor for your Crater Hoof Behemoth or into the Badgermole Cub, which has enabled this strategy to actually work. If you're missing it, it's a good one to go hit. And then you've got a little bit of interaction just with the bounce off. Mockingbird, you can copy some of your interesting hits like the Badgermole Cub. And, you know, if you can also just go wide and pump everything with the Ouroboroid, so you don't even need to hit the Crater Hoof. It's just kind of icing on top. Number 4 is Mono White Lifegain. And although we did see some tools come in for Lorwyn Eclipsed, Mono White Lifegain has started to make a resurgence, and there's no changes to this list from week 3 of Avatar: The Last Airbender. So this is just the old list. It did well this last week in the meta. It really does well the more aggro decks that you're coming up against. So if you're playing up against a lot of combo decks that are going to hit overpower this deck. So really what this I think kind of points to is there just being a little bit less like 4-color Reanimator this week. But yeah, you've got a whole bunch of synergies off of your little 1-drops that then can grow something like your Essence Channeler or your Ajani's Pridemate. Notably, some people will play something here like a Painland, like the Black-White Painland or the Fountain Port, some way that you can hurt yourself so the Essence Channeler can get the Vigilance and Flying on your turn. It doesn't usually have a profound impact on the win rate. And then Exemplar of Light gives you the card draw, which this deck tends to be weak against interaction. So Banishing Light can get rid of the board wipes, which can hurt the strategy. But otherwise, you're just trying to kind of Voltron out of control like you are in Mono White aggro. And, you know, this is another thing that I think a lot of people, okay, so people want to find the spicy tech that is going to revolutionize their deck and change their deck every week, right? They're looking for the new thing that whoever's playing it, right? Whatever content creator you want, right? And one of the downsides with going off of data and kind of just taking the slow approach is that once something's figured out, best of one just kind of leans on that in other iterations, right? So Orzhov Skeletons is another one that's just leaning off of the interaction between the Optimistic Scavenger and the Sheltered by Ghosts. Someone in the community was talking about how they got to Mythic with over a 60% win rate by replacing Seamrip with Ethereal Armor. That's a good way to do it because it's very similar to what we see in mono white aggro. It's got good synergies. This obviously is better when you're needing interaction against Badgermole Cub or in the mirror match. But the Ethereal Armor can definitely make you hit for more damage. But then you've got a little bit of synergies if you're completely new. Then you've got the Forsaken Miner, the Case of the Stashed Skeleton, and the Corpses of the Lost, synergizing to give you some payoffs in black that make you a little bit more resilient if you are getting wiped, because Corpses of the Lost is able to come back over and over. And then United Battlefront is able to dig for your important enchantments. But anyway, so what I was saying is that, like, things aren't going to be reinvented every single week. And you're going to figure out what is kind of working and what's not working. And that's why I try so much to talk about the game design of what goes into why a deck is doing well and why it's the best version of aggro that's currently there, right? And, like, the aggro combo control game design hopefully gives you the tools that you could use to climb the ladder in any scenario, because we always see, almost always see a mixture of combo, control, and aggro. So Jeskai Control is still doing well. It's in the top 8 this week. If you are new and you're looking for guidance on what to craft as far as like what to spend your wild cards on, mono white aggro is a pretty safe bet. And then the thing that's most important is to look for a deck that you enjoy playing, that you don't get tired of. I think that's probably more important than trying to figure out what the best deck is in the meta. But then also knowing all of these meta decks allows you to understand what your opponent is going to play, right? And some people don't like that. Some people don't like that in standards. You just like play a land and it's like, okay, I know what deck you're playing and I know what you're going to play on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, that sort of thing, which is why there's always draft and other things like Commander. But anyway, Jeskai Control, this one has no changes from week 2 either. Same with the Orzhov Skeletons. So we're starting to see... so there's a mixture of things going on, right? One is low sample size is kind of going to lean towards what was already established in the previous meta. But then over time, it will be, some cards will be added to it. And right now, I think a lot of these older archetypes were pretty solidly figured out the first time around. So Jeskai Control, this one was a list taken from Best of 3. There's a couple of things that you can tweak it to make it more relevant to Best of 1, like including Ultima for Jeskai artifacts. Unagi of Kyoshi Island helps you against card draw strategies. And, a lot of the point of this deck is just getting them to scoop when you wrath them. So to each their own, right? But some people will, I think Orcish Artillery was talking about how this deck was bad. I think it could be improved upon, right? I mean, one of the downsides with tracker data is it's not optimized maybe to a specific kind of play or personal preference. But this has all the tools that you need to be relevant in the meta, right? It's got sweepers. It's got ways to hate on card advantage. It's got ways to do some answers for the graveyard. It's got all the basic necessities. Maybe not the sexiest sell, right? I mean, a lot of content creators and Magic the Gathering content creators are basically trying to sell Magic the Gathering cards. So saying it's just like, this is the best deck already figured out is not the best sell, if you will, right? Azorius Tempo, though, this one, or Azorius Flash, we're seeing this one a little bit more in Best of 3, so people are exploring it in Best of 1. Again, I think this is one that I wouldn't craft if you're really concerned about your wild cards. It will see one of the nice things about it is limiting multiple spells per turn. So the more that you're trying to flood the board, the more that you're going to be destroyed by something like High Noon. And then in Best of 1, you're less likely to have the enchantment hate in your deck specifically. So you know, things like the Badger Mole Cub decks that are trying to flood the board, High Noon can kind of just take, you know, stop that. And Voice of Victory, same thing, like they can't cast spells on your turn, kind of limits some of the decks. The Mirror Match, for example, right? That sort of thing. So we've seen Azorius Flash in some form. It has gotten into more popularity recently, though. So this one's kind of a new archetype. Avatar's Wrath, being able to airbend everything. You've got the Aang Swift Savior, which is able to airbend a creature or spell, so you can airbend something that's on the stack, is kind of cool. Spell Snare, getting mana value 2, like the Badger Mole Cubs, is pretty relevant right now. So, you know, you get a little single point interaction, and then you're playing a lot of, on their turn, kind of cards. We're also going to talk about this in Best of 3. And then Enduring Innocence gives us some card draw to continue to refill. Same with the Enduring Curiosity. So these kind of the new decks on the block this week. Craft with care, right? Definitely in the bottom of the top 8 that I talk about. I feel less confident about. But Mono Green Landfall, like you'll notice, Azorius Control is not in this list. I can't remember what 7 and 8 were last week. But anyway, Mono Green Landfall, we've seen a variety of different explorations with trying to make the Badger Mole Cub, specifically a Mono Green Landfall version instead of like a Stompy build that's ending in a Craterhoof Behemoth. And this one is a lot closer to the old version of Mono Green that we saw before, where you're kind of taking advantage of the Ordeal of Nylea to make a ridiculously large Tifa or a ridiculously large Mossborn Hydra. And because you're in the mono green space, you can take advantage of cards like the Archidruid's Charm. You know, exile target artifact or enchantment can have some relevancy. Yeah, and it's kind of a payoff instead of being in Gruul or Temur or something like that. And again, we see a couple of different versions of this. If we compare it to week 6 of Edge of Eternities, which is really when we saw mono green being relevant in Best of 1 last, we can see that there have been just a couple of tweaks, like one less Snakeskin Veil, not running a full play set of the Escape Tunnel, dropping a Traveling Chocobo, not running any Fabled Passage, not running any hard-hitting Question, and instead we're leaning on the Evolving Wilds, right? Like these could be Escape Tunnels if you want. Doesn't really matter. Same with the Terramorphic Expanse. Whatever version of sacrifice, go find a land you want to run. If you want to run the Fabled Passage, go for it. I mentioned the Archdruid's Charm is kind of the payoff for being in the mono green space specifically. And then we also have Commune with Beavers. And this one we got in Final Fantasy, and gives you a little bit of dig that can be nice on turn 1. If you're not going turn 1 Llanowar Elves. So that covers Best of 1. All right, and now for the overview for Best of 3. So similar to last week, we still see Dimir Midrange being the most popular pick in the meta. If you look over a vast majority of tournaments, Izzet Lessons is still a very popular pick, and then we start to see some new kids on the block. So like the Mono Green Landfall that we talked about in Best of 1, they're starting to figure out how to get it to work in Best of 3. Boros Dragons we still see in here, being able to silence the Enters effects. Dimir Control is going to be the Dimir Excruciator, just another name for it. Izzet Spelementals is a cool kind of almost budget build that we saw in the Pro Tour. Rakdos Monument as well. Maybe you've seen the content creators exploring the discard synergies of Moonshadow with the Monument of Endurance, Bloodghast, that sort of thing. Mono Red Aggro is still around, but maybe not as prevalent as before. Same with the Temur Harmonizer and Azorius Control. So what we're going to talk about in Best of 3 this week, though, are the winners of the showcase on Magic the Gathering Online, which will also start off with Mono Green Landfall. So first place in the Standard Challenge was Mono Green Landfall, and really bringing, like, the Sapling Nursery, I think, is what makes this deck a little bit more relevant, because it's specifically gives you a benefit to being in mono green, similar to the Archdruid's Charm, but gives you kind of like a late game reach, right? Each one of your landfalls creating a 3/4. Doesn't mean that you're just going tall on a Chocobo or a Hydra. This one going for the kind of like, how do we doing the Harmonizer 1-turn kill, where we hit something and get enough landfall triggers to hit for an incredible amount of trample damage off of the trample given by the Earthbender Ascension. And then we've got ramp with the Land of War Elves and the Badgermole Cub. And we also see this Fecund Green Shell, and if you control 10 or more lands, creatures you control get +2/+2. So it can kind of give you a boon there. And then whenever this creature or another creature you control with toughness greater than its power, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield tapped, so it can give you additional landfall triggers, which, you know, is nice with the 3/4s coming in off of the landfall from the Sapling Nursery. So the sideboard, we've got the Melt Strider's Resolve for a little bit of interaction, and then makes it so that your creature can't be blocked by more than one creature. And then we've got the Origin of Metal Building for Artifact and Enchantment Hate. Paw Patch Formation does as well. Enchantment Hate, sorry. And then we've got the Torpor Orb, which is a way to stop all of the triggered abilities, which is nice in the mirror match against other Badgermole Cub recipes, deck lists. And then the Mossborn Hydra is an alternative win condition that can kind of pop out of control if they're really good at shutting down the Harmonizer. And then Vivian Reed is good against White Wraths, but also gives us that repeatable artifact and enchantment hate. Second place in the standard showcase on Saturday was a Gruul Landfall deck, and this one is very similar to the list that we just talked about, but bringing in red. So we've got the full bore, and being able to give something +3/+2 can kind of help with the Harmonizer getting something out of control. So if you're warping something in, which you do with the Mightform Harmonizer, being able to give that creature haste until end of turn makes it so that you can, instead of the Harmonizer giving something else doubled power, you can choose itself, which is kind of interesting. And then we have the Vibrance, which was a mythic elemental with the double pip red, was spent to cast it, deal 3 damage to any target. Double pip green, you gain 2 life and search for a land card and put it into your hand. So it can be a nice way to kind of ramp into the top end of your deck. So, and then also, you know, one of the upsides for the playing in red is to get Pyroclasm or Fire Magic, some way of answering the other, you know, board spammy strategies where that's nice to have. You know, it also works well against other, you know, if they're playing the bouncy version of Izzet Lessons. Soul Guide Lantern for Graveyard Hate, Seer for a little bit of interaction, Origin of Metal Building for Artifact and Enchantment Hate, Torpor Orb for the mirror match with Badgermole Cub, and then 2 Vivian Reeds for the Artifact and Enchantment Hate, or just the if they're weak, if their strategy is weak to Planeswalkers. Third place was Azorius Flash, and this one is, you'll see like there's a little bit less of the Avatar's Wrath. They've tweaked this a little bit, but it's similar to what we've seen being explored in Best of 1. So mono red being explored, or sorry, mono green Landfall being explored, as well as Azorius Flash this week by the tryhards. And Azorius Flash is not it's not exactly a new one, right? But Ajani, Outland, Chaperone, that one we did get in Lorwyn. Aang, Swift Survivor, being able to bounce and get some interesting stuff. It's almost like a mixture of token synergies. Instead of having the Enduring Innocence, though, to trigger the card draw off of all the little token synergies, you see things getting tweaked a little bit differently. Still got the Voice of Victory, though. That sort of thing going on here. Interaction with the Seamrip, Flood Pit's Drowner for being able to tap your opponent's stuff, Aven Interrupter for being able to sort of airbend something temporarily, just like the Aang, although it becomes plotted technically. Yeah. And the sideboard, you know, we've got Requisition Raid for Artifact Enchantment Hate. We've got Seamrip for a little bit more interaction. Soul Guide Lantern for Graveyard Hate. Same with Rest in Peace. Disdainful Stroke for anything with mana value 4 or greater. Another Johnny if they're weak against the Planeswalkers. The Glyn Elandra Guardian is a nice way for card draw if you're able to. Because when you bring it, you bounce it after you remove the counters. If it's not the clock you're looking for and you need to outvalue them with the card draw, you can airbend this as well to kind of rinse and repeat. Tishana's Tidebinder is nice for any triggered abilities. So this is kind of like a Torpor Orb, but with a body. You could go for a full playset of the Avatar's Wrath if they are weak to this sort of thing, like playing a bunch of tokens and such, things that don't get airbend very well. And then we also have the Wan Shi Tong, which is an alternative win condition or card draw. All right, and then we have Izzet Lessons. And what's cool about this week is that we didn't really get to talk about some things like Dimir Midrange, which we're going to get into. But Izzet Lessons we've talked about for a really long time. And the list is pretty much optimized to its fullest extent. If we compare this one to the Pro Tour, we can see that basically nothing has changed. We dropped a Soul Guide Lantern in the main to bring in a Itlquintia, so a third copy of the Itlquintia. And then in the sideboard, we dropped a Torpor Orb to bring in a Wan Shi Tong Librarian. So nothing new either, right? We've seen these kind of variations before, so not a whole lot to talk about there. But one of the things that I really wanted to talk about was Dimir Midrange. And we see kind of a split. So we see the old version of Dimir Midrange that's not running as many of the Lorwyn Eclipsed cards, which I think is more closely related or represented by this one. So it's got like your typical culprits of the Spyglass Siren and more of an early blue build. You've got the Enduring Curiosity for the card draw, Kaido, as well, just to outvalue your opponent. And then you have a whole bunch of black disruption or interaction. And so this one, if we compare it to week 7 of Avatar of the Last Airbender, which was the last time that I talked about Dimir Midrange, we can see that there's a lot of little one-ups. So they dropped a Swamp, they dropped a Phantom Interference, they dropped a Preacher of the Schism, they dropped a Fountain Port, a Stab, a Tragic Trajectory to bring in an island. Spell Snare is kind of one of the only new cards being brought in here, playing a full playset of the Enduring Curiosity, playing a Soulstone Sanctuary, and I guess the Hex as well. The Requiting Hex gives us good interactions, kind of like the cut down from Days Gone By. And then we have the Flitterwing Nuisance, and it's a nice one that we got from Lorwyn. So there are some, it's just not leaning as heavily as we see in some other builds. So the Best of 3 sideboard also got a little bit of a tweak, so we dropped 7 cards here as well. So changing 14 cards overall. And we dropped in a Null, Day of the Black Sun, Fabloon Trick, Ghost Vacuum, Negate, and 2 Stabs to bring in the Wan Shi Tong. So lots of this being explored right now, especially with those like land searching for their library kind of things. We've got 2 more Hex if we need to bring in that additional interaction against aggro. Same with Shoot the Sheriff if they don't have an outlaw that's giving us a problem. Soul Guide Lantern for the Sultai Reanimator strategies, Spell Pierce for early Wraths that can be problematic for tempo, and then a Disdainful Stroke if they are going for, like, you can use this to counter a Quantum Riddler, right? It's something that's like if they're cheesing something out with an evoke cost for an elemental, Disdainful Stroke then allows you to counter that because the mana value of the card is different than what they're paying for. All right, and then this is the one that has, I guess, a different version of cards being run. It's got a little bit more of the fairy synergies, and so this one it's almost Dimir Fairies if you squint. But anyway, so this one was, so they're taking more of a starting on black instead of starting on blue. So we've dropped the Spyglass Sirens, right? So we've dropped 3 islands, the 2 Deep Cavern Bats, the Tishana's Tidebinder, Kaido, Enduring Curiosity, Flood Pit's Drowner, Soulstone Sanctuary, 2 Soulstone Sanctuaries, a Cecil, Multiversal Passage, 4 Spyglass Sirens, a Phantom Interference, and a Swamp. To bring in a Swamp, to bring in a Spell Pierce, Spell Snare. My God, I can't read it. I'm getting old. We're bringing in a Fountain Port. We're bringing in 4 starting towns. That, again, is kind of, I think, to help the flexibility of there not being as much predominantly blue. And then we've got the Bitter Bloom Bearer, which is the Bitter Blossom effect on the new Flash 1/1 flyer, that then is going to create more fairies, but at the cost of life. And then this works really nicely, though, for the card advantage that you're going to get off the Enduring Curiosity. and kind of makes a sense to explore it. This one's running the full play set of the Requiting Hex, so really just accepting, having the interaction, and anticipating the Badger Mole Cub strategies. And then we've got three additional copies, so the full play set of the Flitterwing Nuisance. And this allows us to have nice little fairy synergies. But if you're having more of a go wide of a bunch of these little flyers, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player this turn, draw a card. So it's not whenever one or more, right? So for each creature, it gives like a full board curiosity for which can end up giving you just a ton of card draw in this strategy. So the best of three, we got the artifact enchantment hate of an annul, another spell snare, duress for against the non-creature spell strategies like Jeskai Control, Azorius Control, stab for additional interaction, Ghost Vacuum and Soul Guide Lantern for graveyard hate, Disdainful Stroke for people cheesing out higher mana value cards, Fabloon Trick for the mirror match. Dimir Midrange is the most popular outside of... You wouldn't expect it because it was not represented particularly well in the top 8 in the Pro Tour, but it's definitely a popular pick. So Fabloon Trick is a nice one for the mirror match. Horsey Revenant is nice for any of the aggro strategies where the lifelink is particularly relevant. And then the fourth version of Kaido you're going to bring in when you're not up against aggro. Okay, then we got Boros Dragons, and this one, what I love about this top 8 in the standard challenge or the standard showcase was that I didn't get to talk about Boros Dragons either. So between the Pro Tour and between this week, you kind of have a good spread of what's going on in best of 3. So Boros Dragons is really taking advantage of being able to run the Clarion Conqueror in the main, and then the Momo friendly flyer is what made this deck relevant, being able to make each creature you cast with flying one less to cast. So all of your dragons then kind of click over into a more reasonable mana value that makes it more relevant to the clock in best of 3. And then you got some, just like dragon synergies to boot. So some of them give you interaction in interesting ways, while also just giving you the dragon synergies that can beat down your opponent. And then Voice of Victory, then stopping strategies like the Dimir Midrange, or any deck that's looking to play on your turn. And then we've got Requisition Raid for Artifact Enchantment Hate, Doorkeeper Thrall, so that we can really land against if we want to go Clarion Conqueror and Doorkeeper Thrall, we are shutting down the Badger Mole strategies, right? And we got 4 Rest in Peace, so we can also just, if they're a Reanimator strategy, we can lean into hating into the graveyard fully. Exercise gives us Artifact Enchantment Hate as well. It's kind of the new version of Destroy Evil. Pyroclasm or Fire Magic, some way to wipe the early board flood strategies. And then we have Legend of Roku, which is the value card that you would bring in if you're up against like Control, where you need a little bit more dig. And then last but not least, the anticlimactic finish of the second version of Izzet Lessons took down 8th place. And again, this list is practically figured out. So we see that Iroh's Demonstration and a Multiversal Passage got dropped for an island and a Agna Quella. And the best of 3 sideboard got a Quantum Riddler dropped, Seer got dropped, the Wan Shi Tong Librarian, Slagstorm, Flash Freeze, Spell Pierce, and we are running the Unagi of Kyoshi. If they're trying to draw a bunch of cards like Dimir Midrange, then we got the Unagi. Broadside Barrage is great for anything that struggles against the X equals 5 damage, not so great against the Quantum Riddlers. And then we've got Ghost Vacuum for Graveyard Hate. We've got Annul for the Artifact Enchantment Hate. We've got Essence Scatter for Creature Hate, and Negate for the non-creature based strategies. So hope this finds you well as always. I always do enjoy talking about Magic the Gathering, so thanks for listening. Good luck climbing the ladder. There's always going to be somebody who's going to be like, well, actually this deck is better than the other one or whatever. Try not to be that guy. Try to enjoy Magic and wherever it may find you. And good luck climbing the ladder. Good luck competing in your RCQs. If you have any questions, I do my best to try to answer the comments below. And I will see you all next week for week 4, and somewhere in February we're going to be playing with some Mutant Ninja Turtles. So take care, everybody. I'll catch you next week.